Good evening, everybody. It is great to be with you as always. I see the big smile on Sean's face. Busy show, a lot going on right now, of course, with Husker Online. Little Monday rundown live. It's always fun to join forces here and have a good conversation about Nebraska football, basketball, and all that's going on with all of Nebraska sports for that matter. Sean, good evening. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing great. I love the hat. I need to get one of those, Jeff, and kind of hide my bald head.
Us bald guys got to do it, right?
Beautiful.
Just happens to work for me. And I don't know. There's some that do, some that don't, but this one I'm told is all right. So now you're just solidifying that. It makes me feel good. I'll send you one, by the way. That'll be my Christmas present to you.
I appreciate that.
You're going to have to
email a bottle of whiskey in return or something.
I like it. I think I'm going to win the deal there. So, hey, listen, let's get straight to it. You and I got like 15 minutes together, and then we're going to move on to the other guys. But tonight, I want to get straight to, because it's a busy time. I said that at the outset with Husker Online, but I love the transfer portal, Sean. I haven't asked you about where your thoughts are on it. You and I have been in the game for a very long time, covering recruiting, covering transfer, covering traditional college football, the ups and downs and everything that goes with it. It used to be that the build-up to signing day was everything. And now I feel like we're just hyper-focused on the transfer portal, because teams can turn their fortunes around and not have to wait on high school kids to develop necessarily. Like, you could just go grab that guy from Arizona State like you did over the weekend, or you can just go look at that offensive lineman or that defensive lineman, and if it's a fit, you can turn your fortunes around in a year.
Yeah, everything has just become so immediate, the way you can grab guys. I mean, you think about the old days, you had to get releases from scholarships to certain schools. If you wanted to leave Nebraska, you could go anywhere but maybe Iowa. And it was restrictions, and the coach had to grant permission you out of your scholarship. All that's changed, as you know. And I look at the offseason now as a series of mile markers. Obviously, Thanksgiving weekend. Yep. That Monday is the day that players and coaches start to meet after Thanksgiving's over. And then Friday, coaches go on the road. And then December 5th this year was Monday when the portal opened. And that was kind of the madness. For 3 or 4 days, we had 1,000 guys go in. And then, after that, you have signing day on December 21st. So you have 17 days where coaches are on the road doing in-home visits, 3 weekends of official recruiting weekends, really 2, though. It's hard to get guys in that opening weekend. I mean, you can, but it's not easy. December 21st signing day. Then you're going to have, obviously, at Nebraska, classes start on January 23rd. So that's kind of the mile marker for the transfer portal. Anybody that you're dealing with has to get on campus by the 23rd and get in here for classes to begin. But it's just wild. I mean, we thought the old Januaries were crazy, circling around about a high school guy, but this is I hate to say it, it's way more exciting. I mean, it's way more intriguing.
I think it is. I agree. I didn't know how. Nobody did. It's the wild, wild west. None of us knew how this was going to look, sound, feel. Sometimes it's mesmerizing. It's confusing. Sometimes it feels a little dirty because, come on, you and I both know coaching staffs all over America are obviously reaching out to kids before they're supposed to. I mean, there are no rules out here anymore. It doesn't feel that way. No coach would admit to that, but everybody's getting a feel for, hey, are you happy? Like, one thing you realize, Sean, and I know over the weekend you had a player that you're kind of getting reacquainted with, and we'll see if Malachi Coleman ends up deciding to come to Nebraska. But like guys that maybe at first you were connected with, that you thought you were going to get, then it didn't work out. You can never turn the page on guys anymore. And I was talking to a coach the other day who told me no matter how bitter or ugly the situation got on signing day, or no matter how much they thought they had a kid in the fold, if he goes somewhere else, you can't turn your back on him, because you don't know, in a year he may decide he regrets that decision and could be an important piece to the puzzle for you the following season.
Yeah, the running joke used to be the day after signing day was National Unfollow Day on Twitter.
Right.
But you can't do that anymore. I mean, you have to keep all those follows active and live and engaged, because you never know. I mean, this one didn't work out for Nebraska, but here's Keegan Johnson, one of Iowa's best players, goes in the portals. Dad played in Nebraska. All of a sudden, he was back in play. Now he's going to go to Kansas State. Announced Kansas State was going to maybe visit Nebraska and Notre Dame, canceled those trips, visited Manhattan. Boom, he's a Wildcat. But, you're going to get situations like that where a local guy, and Nebraska had one of those this weekend, Jeff. Ben Scott out of Arizona State.
The offensive lineman.
He started center this past year, right tackle. The previous two, he's got 28 games under his belt as a starter. Nobody knew he was in town. It basically took me at the basketball game going over to the area where the recruits were, just because I was getting a popcorn, and I'm like, who is that big guy? And then I connected the dots. That's Ben Scott. I mean, so it was, you're going to get surprises. We learned this week that Jeff Sims, the Georgia Tech quarterback, was on campus, and he was the starter for the better part of 2 or 3 seasons at Georgia Tech as a quarterback. And all of a sudden he's here, and Casey Thompson had shoulder surgery. So there's a lot of intrigue with the quarterback position. Elijah Judy, the A&M defensive lineman, he left College Station because they signed 8 guys and basically dumped millions of dollars. And that's Ben Scott, by the way. That was my best
your photo
from a distance. I really had to go full zoom on my phone. But I'm like, who is this big guy? Didn't look like a high school kid. And you find out not only is he from Honolulu, same high school as Donovan and Dominic Raiola. And by the way, Dominic was at the game with Donovan. And that was interesting to see. But his parents, or his mom, is from Columbus, Nebraska. They got deep roots. So this is one to watch. And Nebraska needs a center, and they need help at right tackle. So this would be a home run addition. And the Raiolas have the inside track. He's got family all over Columbus, which that's the home of Steve Sipple. If you didn't know that, Columbus, Nebraska, great town, about 75 miles from Lincoln. And so this would make sense in a lot of respects if they could get Ben Scott. Jeff Sims, hard to read. We know he was here. We communicated with him briefly. Didn't give much of a visit update other than he was here. And then the other big one, Cornelius, who everybody wants right now. He's the guy in the portal that just got like 1 million offers overnight. And you look at Cornelius, he came in Thursday through Saturday, Angie Cornelius out of Rhode Island, a big time offensive lineman, number 1 right now on the On3 transfer portal rankings.
So you basically had 18 visitors, I think, Sean, over the weekend, right? And Quentin Ives is a running back who we didn't mention here, but we're going through all the names of these guys. You talked about Ben Scott from Arizona State. Elijah Judy would be huge if you somehow got him to agree to come to Nebraska, because he's a big time. Do you feel good about that? What are your thoughts on that? I know he's taking other visits. I read that this morning.
Well, there's 2 things. I mean, other visits, but NIL. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a factor, and it's not supposed to be, but it is. You can't use NIL as inducement, but you can at least, I think you can show factual data that, hey, this is what a right tackle or a starting tackle or a starting quarterback.
This is what we could do for you.
This
right?
is what guys like in your position have made at Nebraska.
Right.
We can't guarantee you're going to get that kind of money, but this is kind of what you get. So NIL is a humongous thing. And a year ago, it was why Nebraska was able to get a few guys. They got Trey Palmer. They got O'Shawn Mathis, Casey Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they got some pretty good players. And, the NIL pitch was a big part of it, because Nebraska had the first collective formed in the country back in July of 2021. I mean, they literally launched the first collective in college football. So they were way ahead of it to when they formed a collective. People were like, you can't do that. And people are like, well, I guess you can. That's part of the rules. And, obviously collectives now are a part of it. I mean, athletic departments have almost tried to work with them now, versus at the very beginning. I mean, they were like the forbidden fruit. You didn't want to have anything to do with the collective, but I think they've gotten smart enough that, these collectives aren't going anywhere. And this time of year with recruiting and the transfer portal, both, the collectives are going to be as big of a part as anything for everybody in college football.
Yeah, Sean, I'm curious, how many collectives, or is it singular, does Nebraska, well, I shouldn't say does Nebraska have, it's a separate group, as you noted, it can't be associated necessarily with the athletic department per se. Somehow they always seem to know what positions are of need. But that said, how many collectives are there for Nebraska?
Yeah, it's a kind of a multi-pronged question. I mean, the original collective ABM is no longer.
Okay.
They folded in December, and that was formed by Scott Frost's people that were here. And, they had a really good concept and got it going well before anybody was even thinking about collectives. I remember I ran into some of the Open Doors people at the very beginning, and people were like, you can't do this. I mean, then all of a sudden everyone had collectives. It's crazy how that caught on fire.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's two collectives at Nebraska, but probably the main one is the 1890 Initiative, which is operated by Matt Davison, but funded by the Peed family, which they are the largest boosters of Nebraska football. And why they're going to be successful is the Peed family is going to fully fund all the operational costs, the marketing, the legal, the accounting, everything that goes with running a collective. They're paying for that. Then if you make a donation to the collective, 100% of their money goes right to the athlete. So that's the main collective. And I mean, you can't really compete against that when you have somebody that's willing to eat the operating costs. Now,
Yeah, sure.
Before they came around, the Big Red Collaborative formed, and that was going to be the replacement for ABM. And they're still around. Bill Gerber, who is one of the heads of Ameritrade, and Matt Hickey, who is very close with the Raiolas as a money manager, and Chris Brown, the former NFL kicker, they're running that one. And they're still around as well, but they're just not off the ground at the level. And ABM's kind of book of business, contract structures all went to the 1890 Initiative. So it is fascinating, I think, for a lot of Husker fans because it's brand new and it is a huge part of things. Like no one's really comfortable with NIL, but it's a very big part of what's going on right now.
Yeah, and I saw in the chat people were asking questions. It's been fine-tuned rather quickly, too. You know, Sean, we all wondered how it would go. You look around the country. I love reading about this, and we both work for On3, and you can follow the transfer portal. You can follow NIL deals. You can see the valuations of players. You know, we've talked about that some. For those that join Husker Online, you can certainly find that. But I find it fascinating how quickly you're kind of weeding out groups that started initially that, and this is not a knock on those groups, but maybe didn't know what they were getting into. The heavy hitters came in. Pretty soon you realized what was what. It is the biggest factor. Let's just, as you said earlier at the start of the show tonight, let's not kid ourselves. If you're not competitive in NIL, you will not be competitive on the football field. Is that period. There is zero chance for you to compete if you're not competitive, highly competitive in the NIL.
And there are some schools in the Big Ten that have had a hard time with it. I mean, it's just, their fans want to win, but at a place like Iowa or Wisconsin, they're not wired like Nebraska fans. I mean, people here are nuts. I mean,
they care.
I mean, they will cancel everything in their life to go to a Nebraska football game. And, no matter what, if there's a wedding, a funeral, you're going to go to the Nebraska football game. And, and it's just, everywhere you go here, people talk about the recruits. And I mean, I go to the grocery store, people want to talk about Nebraska football everywhere you go. And that type of fandom leads to like the collectives and the amount of money that's involved in things. And, it can be a big thing. I think the key for Nebraska is they've got to get organized and structured with Matt Rule and the collective and figure out how they want to do this.
Well, let's get to that because Matt Rule is everywhere right now. I'm sure you ran into him at the basketball game, the aforementioned one. I know he was there with players, and Tony White is now on board and the new defensive coordinator. I've seen Syracuse football up close and personal. I know they run that 3-3-5. One of the things I like about Tony White when I saw the hire, he's young. He's extremely well thought of. He's on the come. He's 43 years old, I believe. Sean, your thoughts on that hire? And really, I think everybody's going to be watching very, very closely, as they should be. And as you guys will cover on Husker Online, the entirety of that staff is that's a big deal. You're trying to get guys in here before signing day, and we're talking about NIL. We're talking about flipping a roster. Well, they want to know who they're playing for besides Matt Rule.
Yeah, getting Tony White, it was an out-of-the-box hire for Nebraska. There's no doubt, but I like it. I mean, I think there was a lot of thought, a lot of research that went into this decision. He's a young and up-and-coming coach that players really like. They play for. He recruits well. I think this is a guy that wants to be a head coach. He's the highest paid assistant coach in Syracuse football history, made in the mid 700,000s. Mm-hmm. They don't actually publicly list their salaries, but on the last tax return reports, he was in the mid 700s. So this is a guy that obviously was highly compensated at Syracuse. And, we don't know the terms at Nebraska other than he will be on a 3-year deal. And, you have to think it's north of 1.1, 1.2 million, if not more. In Nebraska, Jeff has never had $1 million coordinator. We would expect they're going to have 2 of them now.
I was going to say that's about to change.
Marcus Satterfield, they've always been, 850-ish for coordinators. Now you're going to have two probably in the millions, and they're both going to be on 3-year contracts.
Sean, has Matt Rule said when he expects to have his staff completed?
He hasn't put out a timeline. I mean, there's 3 spots left. They've got to get obviously an offensive quarterbacks coach, unless Satterfield moves to quarterbacks. And they could do that too.
Mm-hmm.
But then they have got to get a receivers coach. I mean, so those are at least as of now on offense. And then the other one on defense is linebackers. They have to get the linebacker situation. They have a D-line, they have a secondary. And we don't know what Tony White is going to assign himself to, because a lot of times, obviously, the coordinator on defense will take a positional group too. Like last year, they had the nickels or the safeties, or they took a small group of guys, and so there's still some of those questions. But they've got to get 3 more spots filled, and we think Dvorak from Carolina is probably who is going to be. Rob Dvorak will be the linebackers coach. Jake Peets turned down the job to be the quarterbacks coach, and it was looked to be a shoo-in that he was the guy. And so I think Matt Rule is probably still figuring out. And then the receivers coach job, that was probably going to be Mickey Joseph. So I think if you were really being honest, if this staff would have filled out like you thought, maybe it was going to be Peets, Joseph, Dvorak. Right now, it's probably Dvorak and then 2 wild cards we don't know yet.
It's going to be fun, though. Make sure you guys sign up for Husker Online. You still get in right now for a great, great rate. You'll see it $25 for an entire year. HuskerOnline.com as they continue to follow how this staff is filled out. And then, of course, as Sean and I were talking about at the beginning, at the outset of this, there's no more exciting time with the transfer portal and signing day coming up. Nebraska can radically alter what they are very, very quickly. All teams can, but it's always fun when you're covering one in the midst of major transition and a coaching overhaul. So that just adds fuel to the fire. I see Sip is here. We can bring him in right now. I want to at least say hello to my friend before I have to go to this recital that I'm going to tonight. Sip, how are you? Good evening, sir.
Recital.
Well,
That sounds fun.
He's got a Christmas concert.
It's a Christmas concert. I shouldn't have said recital.
Yeah, do that.
We got ours Thursday night for my kids at school, so I'll be right with you.
Sip, you got to know what kind of – I'm a warrior, buddy. I wanted to be here. I wanted to say hello to you guys. I wanted to document what's with Nebraska having so much fun right now with these hires and kids coming in, 18 kids over the weekend, the whole deal. But I also told Sean I got 20 minutes because I got to get to the school.
Oh, well, hey, now let me do this. Thank you.
Oh, buddy. No, this is fun. I said, hey, let me ask you one question before I let you two take over the broadcast. Mm-hmm. Really curious, Sip. I think this is exhilarating. And I'm not talking about Nebraska, although that's fun too. I thought I was going to hate the transfer portal. I love it.
Really?
I love it. I'm enjoying all of this every day. I can't get enough of it. Now, it's the wild, wild west, and there's unsavory stuff that's happening. And we're going to read follow-up stories where kids walked away from a scholarship, thought they had a home somewhere else, didn't find a home, ended up at a JUCO with nothing. We're going to read those stories. We know we are. There are going to be hard luck times and all of that as they get this figured out. But I think it's exciting to watch a roster overall happen very, very quickly. And you're going to find the staffs that can do it well, that can identify guys that can step in. They fit the culture, but they also improve their segment group. And Nebraska's in a perfect position right now with this being the new reality. Sip, they need a quick overhaul, and they've got an opportunity with a coach that I think is certainly a very popular hire. Seems to probably have a pretty good idea of what he would want, given how many times he's been a head coach. This could be really fruitful.
Yes, it could. And I don't know that I share your love. I don't, but I'm not. I'm probably. I'm okay with it, Jeff. How old are you?
We don't have a choice, Sip. We're screwed.
Right.
Even if we love the old ways, they're gone. That's it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, there's really no sense a bunch of old guys getting on podcasts and video and complaining about it. It's not very appealing, right?
Sure.
Nobody wants to hear that. And it was kind of fun initially to do the shake your fist at the clouds thing, but you know what? You do got to go with it. Now, here's the deal with Nebraska, Jeff. I don't know, Sean. Me and Sean will talk about this when you go to your lovely recital. On defense, I don't know that they need to overhaul this thing.
That's fair. That's fair. They've got good players on defense. That's fair.
Yeah, they could have 10 back, 9 back. O'Shawn Mathis went to the NFL, but they got 10 guys back right now, 10 starters back. Offense, they'll need some work, especially at receiver, wide out. They'll need some more speed. And there's some other positions for sure, but yeah, I'm with you. It seems like you don't want to. I don't think you want the transfer portal to define your program. I don't think if you look at the top teams in the country, the teams in the playoff, there's obviously portal. There's obviously players that have had impact, but I wouldn't say those programs are defined by it.
That's correct. Yeah.
So,
a very small percentage of their roster is transfer portal guys.
right.
And I would say, to your point, Sip, and it's a good one,
Mhm.
if you're humming and you're an elite team and you're Kirby Smart, well, he got there, he copied the Alabama way and got ahead in recruiting before this was even a thing, right? So his roster was loaded, not a lot of need for them to go out in the portal. They've got 5 stars everywhere you look. But at programs like Nebraska, like Florida State, and some of the other once very proud programs trying to get it turned around quickly, I do think you see 7 to 10 guys in a lot of places that can come in and play right away.
Oh, yeah. And even, at programs that are doing okay, you're going to see that a little bit. But I think the ideal thing would be build a foundation with traditional recruiting and then fill in as you need. You're right. I mean, isn't that the sort of the ideal?
I think so, yeah.
But yeah, it's fascinating, but it's also difficult. Like Nebraska did a good job going in the portal last year and getting guys like O'Shawn Mathis and Casey Thompson and Trey Palmer, pretty highly sought after guys that you had to probably pay a little money for. Now, can they do that again? Can they go in and have that kind of success? That's what it'll be. You're right. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's fun to document at the very least. And on that note, Sean, I'm going to let you take over. Guys, wish me luck.
Yeah, you'll be fine. Just try to get into it.
Hopefully your wife's got a seat saved for you. Those things get crowded.
Yeah, there's a part of me that hopes she doesn't, and I can stand in the back. And then that way I know, like, when it's time, when that last note hits, see you at the house, hon.
When the last note hits. Sounds like a book. Thank you. Thank you.
Be good, guys.
All right, thanks for joining us.
Catching up again next week. Be good.
Yeah, thank you a ton for joining us.
Oh.
Well, Sip, let's hit on Tony White. I mean, we haven't really talked publicly since the news came out on the hire of the new defensive coordinator. You're going to have a good column on 3 Husker Online tomorrow. You talked to our good friend Tim Cassidy, and the connection there is Tim Cassidy was with Tony White at Arizona State. So you've picked up a lot of insight on Nebraska's new defensive coordinator hire. What are your early thoughts on this hire?
Well, I mean, it's, people don't want to I don't think they want us to come on here and just sign off on everybody. But White really strikes a good chord in a lot of ways, Sean. He's 43. He would say right now his career's ascending because of the job he did at Syracuse. He whipped around the Syracuse defense. Okay, now, in 2019, Sean, they were 115th nationally before he got there, 115th nationally in total defense. Now, in 2021, they were a top 30 defense or top 20 defense. They were 19th. Okay, this year, Sean, they were in the top 10 total defense for part of the season, ended up top 30 defense. So now his thing, what Tony White told Syracuse.com, is that he turned around a defense at Syracuse. Now he wants to do the same thing at a program steeped in tradition, and that would help his marketability. And I like to hear that. Why? Why do I like to hear it? Because he's ascending and he wants to ascend. He wants to, and I know some people say, well, why doesn't he just want to, why isn't he saying he doesn't want to stay at Nebraska? Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't even hear that necessarily. He just wants to keep ascending and maybe be a head coach someday. Maybe that'll be at Nebraska. But the point is, he's 43. He's Sean. I mean, you try to hire guys that are on the upswing, and that's what he is. So I like that. At Arizona State, he was with Cassidy. Tim Cassidy, who was the chief of staff for Bill Callahan here. He was the chief of staff. Oh, he went to Arizona State with Todd Graham, then was with Herm Edwards. And they were with Herm together, Tony White and Cassidy. And Cassidy saw up close that this Tony White's a good recruiter, he said. Was a good enough coach that they elevated him to defensive coordinator interim in 2019. And just says he's just a smart, he's a family man. He makes quick decisions. He said he'll fit here really well. He says he's a good fit for this place. His temperament is good. He can handle it. He can handle the pressure here. That's what Tim thinks. So Sean, I mean, a lot of it, I really like the picture. I really do.
Yeah, it's out of the box, but you mentioned the ascending thing. I mean, I think about coordinator hires here. You know, Bo Pelini was a guy that took this job as a coordinator years ago to ascend his career, and it did. I mean, and if you play your cards right, this job can do a lot for you. I mean, unfortunately, over the years, there haven't been a lot of guys that have been able to come out of Nebraska because of other things. But you know, I think a guy like Pelini, when you think about his history, Frank Solich hired him kind of out of nowhere, and all of a sudden he went, from Nebraska to Oklahoma to LSU, head coach at Nebraska.
That's a great, Sean. That's a really good example. And yeah, I mean, you hope. And you know what was Bo? Bo was probably in that age range. He was 42, I think, when he was hired originally at Nebraska. So Tony White's 43. He kind of fits what Rule talks about. Rule likes the idea of hiring younger coaches, guys with a lot of energy. Again, I would stress that Cassidy said White's a good recruiter. And I don't know, Sean, you know more about this game, that recruiting game, than I do. I asked Tim, would you send a coordinator out? And he said in this day and age, you should have all hands on deck recruiting wise. Now I don't know what Rule has planned for Tony White, but yeah, and it's not that, you know, we're talking about Tony White and some people are going to say, well, why didn't you? And I didn't write about Satterfield yet either. Why aren't you talking about Marcus Satterfield? Well, I don't know anybody that knows Satterfield like Cassidy knows White. I mean, Cassidy and White still text. Tim texted Tony White and said, hey, this is a home run for you, dude. So, well, you know, Sean, I'll write about Satterfield in days to come.
Yeah, we've had so many coaches come through Nebraska. The one advantage is we have connections to a lot of guys around the country because, I mean, you think about all the people that have walked through here the last 20 years where, the 20 years before that, it was the same 9 guys coaching.
Well, and I had one coach tell me the other day, it's not good. That revolving door at Nebraska's hurt it. I mean, it's, you know, and I think that's some of the reason why Donovan Raiola is probably still here is that it kind of slows the revolving door at that offensive line position. But so we'll see. Hopefully, if you're a Nebraska fan, you hope some of these guys are here for a while. Although Rule's history is he moves quick to move guys out if they're not productive. That's his history.
Haven't seen that at Nebraska before.
No, not really. I mean, I'm trying to think.
Frost, I mean, it was hard for him to move guys out. I mean,
Frost, hard for him to move guys out. What about Riley?
Well, that's why they brought in Billy Devaney. Yeah.
What about Bill Callahan?
I mean, remember Billy Devaney when he was here?
Billy Devaney for Riley, yeah.
They hired Dante Williams while Brian Stewart was still on staff. And they didn't even bring, him into the fold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. But anyway, so I don't know how this is all going to turn out. How's it all going to turn out? Who knows? Rule doesn't even have his whole staff hired yet. So we'll see.
I've lost camera here. Can you hear me, Sip?
I can hear you. I can't see you, Sean, but
I'm back. I don't know what happened there, but kind of went dark. But yeah, you think about some of the coaches over the years that have come through here, and if that will be different. If Rule sees a weak link, he's obviously going to have more of a CEO approach and make
his history is to move on that quicker than we've probably seen here. Now, hopefully, he won't have to, but that rule, yeah, I think you're right, Sean.
Hey,
Trev has a CEO, which is what he wants.
Before we bring Robin in, I got one more question, and this has been on the chat a couple times tonight. What do we know about the receiver and the quarterback's coach? And I said earlier there could be some shifting. Maybe Satterfield could coach quarterbacks if there's another candidate that emerged.
Yeah,
But Jake Peets, as we reported Saturday, had that job probably, but then it didn't work out, and he's going to stay in LA instead. So they've got 2 offensive spots left. We still think Rob Dvorak's going to be the linebackers coach. But yeah, I think your guess, Sip, is as good as mine what direction they go on these 2 hires.
Hard to know. Now, Sean, I mean, you've probably talked about it. Matt Rule really has tightened things up over there. I mean, there's not a lot of information flowing out of North Stadium right now, which is fine. Now, I was interested I'm glad you brought up the assistant positions, particularly the receiver spot, because I heard you say that you think that would have went to Mickey. I don't know. I mean, Mickey,
well, before we knew what we knew, and before, just once we kind of learned how much money Mickey was going to ask for too, that changes a lot. Because
that's why I don't think he would have got that. He would have settled for a receiver coach job. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, and it's hard to know like the history of his thoughts on Rule, because his good friend at LSU, Joe Brady, worked for Rule.
Right.
Was fired by Rule.
Fired. And Rule and Brady don't have a good relationship.
So what was that relationship when there was a lot of pieces to that puzzle that we never even got to learn. I mean, that day happened so fast. But hey, Trey, let's bring Robin Washington in here. And so
thank you guys.
Robin, you're on mute. There you go. What's up, Rob?
What is happening, fellas?
Well, Sip already said goodbye. So
all right. Well, good talking to you, Sip.
Hey, you guys talk about hoops.
Now you guys were. I was at the basketball game to kind of observe the football stuff. You guys were there covering it on the basketball end. A rare PBA Sipple appearance, by the way.
Oh, let's not say that.
I'm kidding. You're talking.
He really shows up for the big ones.
Yeah,
hey, he was talking about going down to Kansas City with you, Rob.
Yeah, got a spot in the car.
Well, hey, let me ask Rob about that before I depart the premises here. Rob, now correct me if I'm wrong here, but Kansas State seems like a big game. If Nebraska has a non-con win against Creighton, which it does, and can add one against Kansas State heading into the Big Ten, and you can get 7 or 8 in the Big Ten wins, does that put them in a pretty good spot with the NCAA selection committee or not? Is that simplifying things?
Well, I mean, you look at what their strength of schedule is going to be, 7 or 8 wins. You're going to get a lot of quad ones. I mean, they've already played. I think one of the games is now. I think the Oklahoma game is no longer quad 1. I think they fell out. But anyway, at one point they had, after Purdue, they played 6 quad 1 games. That was as many as any team, Division I team in the country. The only other team that had played that many was Omaha. So, that in itself gives plenty of opportunity. You talk about the degree of difficulty with a schedule like that. If you get 8 wins with that type of schedule, especially with the league being what it is, I think the conference RPI is going to be just fine. With the number 1 team in the nation kind of kicking it off with Purdue, but that's going to give you plenty of opportunities. And you add in, a true road win at Purdue, a neutral site win over Florida State, a home win over Boston College. And if you can go get another neutral site win over Kansas State, who's going to be right there in the thick of it in the Big 12. That's a pretty strong resume right there. Now, again, that's a lot to ask, but one thing that has surprised me as much as anything with this team is the level in which they've defended every single night, especially since the return of Derek Walker. And then obviously when they have Sam Griesel, if they defend like they did against Purdue, like the way they did against Creighton, and I'd even throw, for the final 25 minutes of that Indiana game, they can compete with anybody. I mean, especially with the teams left on their schedule, they're built to compete in the Big Ten for the first time in a long time. So you look at some of those games like Penn State, like Northwestern, like even Ohio State, like Rutgers, a little differently than maybe you did going into the season, where those were always such tough games for Nebraska because of the style of play those teams have. Well, Nebraska's playing that now, and they have the personnel that can match up with that now. So I do think that the opportunity certainly seems a lot greater than it did even a couple of weeks ago. And if they can find a way to go beat Kansas State in Kansas City, Kansas State's a good team. If they can find a way to win that game and somehow come out 2-2 out of this absolutely brutal 4-game stretch, I would consider that a big win for the program.
Rob, we've obviously seen a lot of just drama with Husker coaches over the years, both football and basketball, but you get the sense people really want Fred Hoiberg to succeed. You get the sense there's an appreciation for the style they're playing and maybe the adjustments that Fred made to how he coaches and that they're working. And I think a lot of fans wanted to see kind of changes like this, and he listened. And all of a sudden, I mean, what's your read on just Hoiberg and kind of that whole lay of the land right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that he's done everything right since he's been here except win games and the product on the court. I mean, he's recruited at a high level. He's said and done all the right things. He's a great ambassador for the program. He's extremely well respected amongst the coaching community. And he's just a guy that, from beyond what has transpired on the court over the last 3 years is really easy to get behind. And now, for the first time since he's been there, he's given fans something to be proud of. With the effort his teams are playing with, just the tenacity and the fight that these guys are showing, even when they're undermatched against maybe more talented teams, they don't play like it. And I think that's something that a lot of Nebraska basketball fans, it's really all they ask. They just want something that they can get behind, that they can root for, and know that night in, night out, the team that they're supporting is going to give max effort, and they're not going to quit. And when things go wrong, they're not just going to check out and lose a game by 35 points and get embarrassed on national television. This group's not made of like that. So that's a big part of why I think the tenor for this season is so much different for Fred in particular, that you have to give him credit for the changes that he made this offseason. I mean, this is a 180 flip.
Is that simple?
Yeah, it might be. Let me check out. I'll check out.
Okay.
All
right, we're good. So anyway, what I was saying is, you got to credit Fred for doing what he did this offseason and doing a 180-degree flip of what he's always been about stylistically and schematically, to where instead of offense, he's focusing on doing the dirty work. And it's not pretty, but it works. And he hired the right coaches to help him with that, surround himself with a good staff, and then went and got a totally different type of player than he's normally recruited, at least since he's been here. So he's put in the effort, and you're starting to see the results of that. And again, if they can maintain that type of effort and remain as competitive as they have been over the course of the season, to where you're going into February, March, and there's still at least somewhat relatively meaningful basketball being played, I think that's, again, the bar is set fairly low for this program. That would be a good first step finally to taking this thing where it needs to be.
Well, and no one's ever going to argue that Matt Abdelmassih didn't bring good talent to Nebraska. He brought good talent here, but I think the strings attached or the promises made or whatever it would take to get guys here as far as minutes, shots, style, play, it just wasn't a style that was going to work here. And I think for Nebraska, the style they're playing now is a much better fit for how they can win with the players that they have available in this area.
Well, if you look at Fred's Iowa State teams, what made them different was they had a bunch of, junkyard dog type guys where they were extremely skilled, but also were tough. I mean, they had guards that could defend the heck out of the basketball. And, they were one of the toughest, most physical teams in the conference, especially on the perimeter. And that you pair that with their overall level of talent, that's what made them so good. And, for whatever reason, they went out with an approach where it seemed like the goal to start was just assembling the best available talent and not putting enough thought into how those individual pieces were going to fit together as a cohesive basketball team, especially in the Big Ten. And it took them far too long to figure it out. But again, they at least figured it out. And Fred, kind of took it on the chin and made some tough decisions. Again, doing something that he's never done as a head coach with his style of play and his emphasis on defense and taking the air out of the ball and milking down the shot clock and doing all those sorts of things. But it's working. And I think he's found that he's got a recipe now. He's got an identity that they can build around to where this is what we want our team to be about. These are the types of players that we need to recruit to fit that program identity. And it's, again, it took 4 years to figure that out, but at least they figured it out. And so far, they've had pretty instantaneous success just with the work they've done over the last few months.
Before we bring in Jim Rose, Robin, what's the Kim Palm at for K-State, Nebraska, and what are you anticipating for a crowd there? Any, I guess maybe Grant Flanders and Derek Young at K-State Online might have a better read too, but are you expecting like a pretty good crowd down there for this deal?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, Kansas State's doing pretty well. They're 54th in Ken Palm right now. They're 9-1. So I mean, they're off and running, and their only loss was on the road against Butler. So they've got wins over LSU, Cal, Rhode Island, Wichita State. So they're going to be a tough team as far as the crowd is concerned. Again, it's a neutral site game, but you're right in Kansas State territory. But I think with the way the season has gone, there's probably going to be a few more Nebraska fans willing to make that trip down to Kansas City. I mean, any excuse Nebraska fans can get to go down to KC, they're usually going to take it. And so
check out the lights in the plaza.
Exactly. Make a weekend of it. It's a Saturday, 6:30 p.m. game. So lots of time before and after to make a trip out of it. So I think it'll be a Kansas State lean, but it might not be like the true home court on a neutral site atmosphere like Nebraska and Sioux Falls when they played Oklahoma State up there, where it was like 99-1 Husker Oklahoma State fans. But this is going to be a critical game. We talked about earlier just about what it would mean to win this game, to go and beat a very good Kansas State team on a neutral site. I mean, that is one of the, as far as a resume, you look at that game, you look at Creighton as like two of the signature wins of the season thus far. And it's not going to be easy, especially in that environment. But I do think that with the way Nebraska's playing defensively, they can compete with anybody they have left on their schedule.
All right, where are you getting before we go, where's your barbecue going to be at? You going to get some barbecue?
Q39, always. I've decided a few years ago that was my favorite spot. So if I have to go to one, and I'll try to hit up a couple, but if I have to go to one, Q39 is where it's at.
All right. Well, hey, Rob, I'll see you tomorrow, but appreciate you coming on tonight.
Absolutely.
All right, let's bring in Jim Rose now next as you to follow up the great Robin Washed. Are you going to be down in Kansas City, Rosie?
I've got a lot of opportunities down there, big guy. I should go back down. I ought to be going back down just to, revisit my old haunts. That's a good one. Jack Stack is my personal favorite from the time that I lived and worked down there. So you can't go wrong. If you cross into what you call the greater Kansas City metro area, every barbecue joint is good. But Q39 is very, very good. Ollie's, Gates, the Golden Ox.
Joe.
You can't go wrong. You just can't go wrong.
Well, you can't go wrong at Joe's either.
And Joe's, big time. Big time. Jack Stack was my personal favorite barbecue place in Kansas City, but the Savoy Grill was my favorite place. That's right downtown, in the heart of downtown. When I was going down there, nobody else was down there. Now everybody's down there. Well, everybody lives in downtown KC.
You were a talk show host for how many years in Kansas City?
2 years down in KC on KMBZ, which was the Royals station at the time, and I did Royals pre- and post-game show and filled in once in a while when Denny Matthews wanted to take a day or two off. Had a great time in Kansas City, wonderful experience, great friends down there. I loved it down there, but chance to come back and do Husker sports was a little bit too much for me to turn down. So I've been here ever since, Shano.
All right. Well, before we get into Husker talk, give me your Denny Matthews impersonation. It is legendary. Denny Matthews talking about the new defensive coordinator hire at Nebraska.
Well, it seems like they've found the right guy to run the place, and certainly if they can find somebody willing to come to Nebraska where they have 79 inches of snow a year in Syracuse, he'd probably crawl from Syracuse to Lincoln, and there's no question in my mind that if this defensive coordinator works out, why he's going to be one of the all-time greats at Nebraska.
Jim Rose impersonations are highly underrated, and we probably need to get more.
There's the man.
There's Denny right there, and you're friends with Denny Matthews.
Yeah, we're very good friends. We've been friends for years and years. He was a good mentor to me. Denny's a little bit of a different cat. He's not the kind of guy. Here we are talking about Denny Matthews, who for 50 years has been the voice of the Kansas City Royals. He's not the most public figure in the world. You figure a guy who's been as big in Kansas City as Den has for, well, yeah, like we said, 50 plus years. You figure that he'd be more recognizable around town, but he's not. He doesn't do TV commercials. He never did real television. He doesn't do a lot of freelance work. He's just a very under the radar kind of guy. And certainly a lot of people know who he is, but you consider the popularity of some broadcasters in their communities enjoy. Denny is perfectly happy being completely anonymous, completely invisible. He can go anywhere he wants. He can do anything he wants, and he doesn't have people. It's not like he doesn't like people. He does like people, but his personality is not what you would equate with most big-time Major League Baseball announcers. He's in the Baseball Hall of Fame. He was given the Ford Frick Award a few years back. Gosh, it's been 10, 15 years now. But Den's good with it. He's okay being somebody that nobody knows. And it's a very rare personality. But no, I love him. He's a wonderful guy. I grew up listening to him. And I wish I could see him more often. I just don't get to see him as much as I used to.
If you're wondering how the Husker Online Rundown show got down the road to Kansas City, Nebraska basketball plays in Kansas City on Saturday against Kansas State. It allowed us to tee up Jim Rose for some fond memories of his former KC days when he started off against the likes of Jason Whitlock and Kevin Keatsman. But let's talk about Nebraska football.
Nobody wants to revisit my very, very unimpressive days in Kansas City, Shano.
But your thoughts on Tony White and Donovan Raiola for that sense. I mean, just your read on going to Syracuse, getting an out of the box hire. By the way, that has a connection with Tim Cassidy. They work together at Arizona State, and Sip's going to have a column tomorrow on 3 kind of detailing his thoughts on this hire for Nebraska, and then retaining Donovan Raiola, which I think to the rank and file Nebraska fan, that might be a surprise.
I don't think there's any question that there are 2 factors with Donovan Raiola. The first one is his nephew is the number 1 rated player in the class of 2024. And if he's coaching here, Nebraska has a much sizably larger chance of getting Dylan Raiola to reconsider his commitment to Ohio State. Can't ignore that that's a factor, but I don't think it's the only factor. He really is highly regarded, and you can't really blame last year on him. A little, but not that much. His top 2 linemen were essentially gone from the start of the season, Prohaska and Nurile. So you take the top 2 linemen out of that bunch, and that makes a big, big impact. Plus, he didn't recruit any of these guys. They were recruited by different people to do different things. So clearly, Coach Rule saw in this dude an up-and-coming young offensive line coach whose brother was a truly great Nebraska football player and whose nephew is a truly outstanding prospect. So if you combine all of those ingredients, the soup tastes pretty good.
And then your thoughts on Tony White. I mean, he was a name that nobody really knew was on the radar for this position. And then Pete Thamel just dropped the bomb that Nebraska's hiring Tony White. And, you learn more about this guy, and he's really an interesting hire in a lot of respects.
His record of achievement is pretty good. He went back to when he played linebacker at UCLA. He was a good football player, and then he just started rising through the ranks of the coaching ranks, which is not easy to do. It's very competitive. But if you look at his results at Syracuse, now again, like Denny Matthews said, they get 79 inches of snow a year up there. Who the hell would want to go there? It's true. It's not a great place. You might think, well, New York's got a bunch of players. Not really. And Sean, you can speak to this. New York high school football isn't that good. In fact, there's probably more players in New Jersey, high caliber players on an annual basis than the state of New Jersey than New York. New York State is not a big high school football state. So you think, well, boy, that's a great recruiting situation. No, it really isn't. It's a very, very difficult recruiting situation for football, which is one of the reasons they've gone through guy after guy after guy after guy. But that conference, the ACC, is an extremely difficult conference for you to coordinate a defense because you consider you're as far north as Syracuse and you're as far south as Miami of Florida and Florida State. And the level of football played and the style of football played in the ACC is extremely different from one region to the next. You got Boston College, Pittsburgh, Syracuse in the upper tundra, as you might say. Then you got those middle Atlantic programs like Virginia and Virginia Tech, all the way on down south, and then throw in Louisville. But his numbers were really good. In fact, every year they got markedly better statistically. And his last year, this last season, and again, you might say, well, who did Syracuse play? Well, anytime you're playing Florida State, Clemson, Louisville on an annual basis, you're going to play good teams offensively. They do know how to move the football. And statistically, you can't argue that his teams, I mean, it's all right there in black and white, they got better statistically every year. And his last year, they were only giving up 320 yards per game, and they were only giving up 22 points per game. That says he took guys and made them better because he's not going to get very many great players. Quick, name the great players at Syracuse defensively in the last 35, 40 years. A lot of Nebraskans will say Tim Green. Well, he played in the early 80s. You're just not going to get him up there. So you got to make them up there. And obviously Tony can do that. I'm impressed with that hire. Of all of the hires that Matt Rule has made, and I don't know a lot of these guys, but of all of the hires, just based on what I've read, I like this guy as much as anybody.
I agree. I think the running backs coach, EJ Barthel, intrigues me too. And how they're recruiting too, Jim, with the emphasis on speed. They get, the kid out of Texas this week, that runs a 10-2 in the 100. Bryce Turner, Jalen Lloyd is on the verge of committing, and he's a 10-4 guy. And, the emphasis on this track speed, it's either going to make them look like a genius or they're going to have a hell of a track teem.
Yeah. The Nebraska track and field program is benefiting greatly by the transfer portal and the early signing period. I think, look, nobody ever argues, Sean, that a team that's really fast is going to be at a disadvantage. Now, if there's 10 inches of rain falling or it's a blizzard, it's a little hard to use your speed. But most Saturdays, day in and day out, if you've got more speed on both sides of the ball, you're going to have a chance to make plays. I was intrigued by all of the 3-5-5 defensive experts that somehow managed to make it onto Twitter at the same time, right after Tony was hired. And they said, this is the wrong defense for this conference. This is the wrong guy for this program. What's Matt Rule doing? Blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, the 3-5-5 cuts down on your big plays. That's the reason you stay in that base. But look, Matt Rule's a defensive guy. He played linebacker in the Big Ten. He knows what it takes to stop Big Ten offenses. So you're going to see a variation of that 3-5-5.
The 3-3-5.
3-3-5. I'm sorry.
They'd be pretty good if they had 13. Then it might work.
Yeah, 3-3-5. Excuse me. I'm suffering the ill effects of an allergy medication.
Oh, no.
3-3-5. Yeah, we play with 13 guys. You're right. We're in great shape defensively.
Boy, what do you think on these other hires they're going to make? I mean, I think there's a lot of intrigue where this is all going to go because Jake Peetz, from all reports and people we've talked to, he had the job. In fact, we know of at least one recruit he talked to. But things changed. The coordinator from the LA Rams took the job at Kentucky, and maybe that put Jake in line to be we don't know. We'll find out in the offseason what that means for Jake Peetz. But he told Matt Rule Friday he was not coming to Nebraska. And kind of there's two big holes still: receivers coach, quarterbacks coach, and then we definitely think Rob Dvorak is probably the guy that's going to be the linebackers coach from recruits that we've talked to. But these are still questions that got to get filled on the offensive staff.
Yeah, I think Peetz, this was not, to me, this was a little bit of a jump for Jake Peetz, because once you've been in the NFL, and I was talking to Tom Rathman about this once, and he was a longtime coach in the NFL. Once you coach in the NFL, for a lot of guys, it's very difficult to go back to college. Not that they don't want to, and Jake is a classic Nebraska kid. St. Mary's High School in O'Neill, Nebraska, a walk-on deep snapper. I remember I was doing the games when he played. So it was a great story. But he, I think, decided some time ago that the NFL was the path he wanted to be on. And the assistant coaching jobs in the NFL are very different from assistant coaching jobs in Nebraska. They're far less public. Maybe Jake likes it that way. He's making contacts right now that'll ultimately get him a coordinator position and then a head coach position. This is the same track that Zach Taylor followed, although Jake's been in it a little bit longer. It's just very hard once you've been in that NFL construct where the player acquisition process is very different. Player development process is very different. Everybody's skills are highly refined. So now there's a lot of strategy involved. It's a lot of one-on-one matchups. It's who can overcome injuries. It's a very different thing than traveling around the country, sitting in the living rooms of a 17-year-old, trying to convince mom and dad that I'm the guy you can trust. Plug in the NIL business. You can work your rear end off on a kid for a long time, and then the other school comes in with more NIL money and you're out. That's frustrating. I'm not surprised. It's hard to pluck guys from the NFL who aren't unemployed. Now, in many cases, guys are unemployed. Or in the case of Brett Bielema, he was in the NFL. He was going to leave for a head coach position in the Power Five. He got that. So it's just hard. It would have been great to have Jake here. I think he would have been a great assistant coach. He's done a great job in the pros. Everybody loves him in the NFL. But I'm not surprised.
All right, Rosie, how many Christmas parties have you been? I'm sure thanks for taking some time. I'm guessing the Rosie Christmas party schedule has been keeping you busy.
Yeah, well, I had one on Friday I had to miss. I was out of town. I had to go do some work out of town. So I missed Friday. I got one on Wednesday afternoon. Then I had one last Thursday. I should say last Thursday was the first one of the year. So I had one Thursday and Friday. And then I got one Wednesday afternoon. I got another one Thursday. I got two on Thursday that are corporate Christmas parties. So, I'm going to have to get a driver, Shano. There's no doubt about it. If I'm playing with fire here, I probably better hire somebody to haul me around. Otherwise, there's going to be a headline. And as we saw with Chris Beard, you don't want a headline.
No.
You don't want a headline. Now, I'm probably not going to have any domestic abuse, but you don't want the headline. And like you, a man in a very high elevated media position, there's always great risk. So Christmas holiday party season is always trouble for Rosie, which is why I got to start slowing it down.
Well, Rosie, we'll talk in the morning and probably next week. And thanks again, Trey. Thanks again. Jeff Cameron, by the way, had to step off to go to a Christmas recital. So he was on for 15 or 20 minutes, stepped off. Thanks to Robin Washett, Steve Sipple. That wraps it up here for another edition of the Husker Online. What do you got there?
I got a little orange here. This is for Husker fans, okay? Because there was a stretch there, Shano, when this was pretty much it for Nebraska at the end of the month of December. Everybody talked about a little tiny orange. Well, we're going to get back there, folks, okay? Maybe I'm just being a super fan here, but I feel very good about wrapping my arms around little fruits like these for future reference. We're going to get back to orange bowls. We're going to get back to maybe tangerine bowls or apricot bowls or peach bowls. But we're going to get back there. You hang in there, all right? Husker fans, hang in there. Glad tidings are coming.
I want a bowl trip too. Well, hey, that's a great way to end the show. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us here on another edition of the Husker Online Monday Night Live show.